like every good show like this, I'm gonna try and lead with the date at the top, so people
by the time you listen to this.
So yeah, people can contextualize that none of it is true by the time they listen. Welcome to the Georgia Politics Podcast. It is Friday, January 25th. I am Preston Thompson, your host. We've got a lot of cooks in the kitchen today. Let's go real quick around the room, introduce ourselves, and then I want to get right into the latest news. So on my left here we have
Mike Kennedy, 8 years on the Alpharetta City Council, just rolled off about a year ago and enjoying private life.
Oh, I'm sure you are. And
Eamon, Keegan. I am the president of New Prospect Strategist, a local governmental affairs and political consulting firm.
Do we need to run through all the candidates you've been working with recently?
We don't have that kind of time.
Yeah.
the clock is ticking now.
I'm Hans Appen. I help run the podcast network with Daniel here, and just a politics junkie, so I'm excited to be here. Thank you, Preston.
Perfect. So let's start most recently on kind of the breaking news train. We are walking into the room as a deal has been negotiated on the shutdown. But in Georgia-related news, last night, Johnny Isakson gave an impassioned speech from the Senate floor on bipartisanship, working together, and then voted for the Democratic majority plan to reopen the government, which ultimately didn't pass. I have seen on the wonderful internet that this was a nothing, and he just did this because he had coverage to do so, and that this was also a courageous move by a establishment Georgia senator who is kind of the adult in the room. So I want to go around and get somebody's thoughts on that.
I think it was legit. I don't think it was a political. I mean, what does Johnny Isakson have at this point in his career to do with a throwaway vote? I mean, he's the establishment's establishment, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think he's just one of those guys that goes to Washington primarily for the right reasons. You know, hey, let's keep the train on the tracks and do our business and be responsible about it.
Well, I was having this conversation with Ben Burnett earlier, and he thinks it was a throwaway vote. I think it's the opposite of that. I think it was a brave vote. My thinking was a throwaway vote would be a no vote there. You know it's not going to pass, so why go out on a limb? Mm-hmm. The brave thing to do is vote yes and go out on a limb and potentially suffer President Trump's wrath on Twitter. So I think it was a brave vote.
Well, the context has changed now that we know that there's a deal in place, right? So if we look at it just last night and see it as just another one of the continuing resolution, reopen the government votes, maybe it's different. But today, does the context change at all, Eamon?
I don't think so. I mean, Johnny is what he is, and I think he is there for the right reasons, what Mike said. But I just think he wanted to get something done because he realizes what a disaster all this is. And, he's a guy that works with people, and he's always been a very popular guy in Georgia. So, I mean, I think he did it for the right reasons. I don't think it was any stunt or any games or tricks.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I saw online people saying, see, Senator Isakson, the adult in the room, is against the wall. And that's not true. As far as I understand it, I mean, he wanted to get the government back open with a promise to renegotiate. So maybe that becomes true in the following weeks. I wouldn't count on it. But this is a get the government back to work vote, not a I am not in favor of the wall vote.
Joe Manchin, same way.
Yeah,
Sure. Wasn't crazy about either plan, but votes yes to get the government open and keep talking.
Does Johnny Isakson run for re-election in 3 years, 4 years?
I don't think so.
I don't think
he's
so
had some
either.
health issues. He's getting up there in age, so he may not have a re-election to worry about.
That's true. I think after 2020 cycle, we'll probably see an announcement that seat will open up, especially if there's kind of a good candidate that he has in mind to maybe replace him and continue that legacy, and a long legacy too. That will be a great kind of retirement run he'll have. We'll get to look back.
Ben Burnett would tell you that that's him, but
Yeah.
he's not here. He's not.
Ben
here.
Burnett's running for everything. I heard he's looking at presidency
Depending
too.
on which paper you read.
Yeah.
That does seem to be a trend, though. If Senator Isakson knows that he's not running for re-election, let's assume that for a second. We've seen that across the Republican Party in the Senate from a few different folks.
The same shield that Jeff Flake is using, and is it
Corker
in Tennessee.
Yeah. So that
I
would
keep
give
waiting
him some coverage.
the rumor is it's Mitt Romney, but I keep waiting for the recently elected Republican senator who takes a stand and bucks whatever President Trump is up to these days.
I believe it's pronounced Mitt Romney. Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah.
He did. He did
yes
vote
also,
for it. Yeah.
Yeah, Romney voted along with Isaacson.
Susan
yesterday.
Collins and Lisa Murkowski, I believe, were the four.
That
yeah.
as well. So let's get to the other senator from Georgia, and something I hoped we could put off for as long as possible. But re-elections, campaign 2020 has started. As recently as this week, we had a candidate announce 15 days into Lucy McBath's tenure that State Senator Brandon Beach is going to be running against her come 2020. So let's first talk about David Perdue, and then we'll go down the line. David Perdue is a fantastic campaigner. Cannot be underestimated with the jean jacket. Something he's going to have to reckon with is that he's aligned himself with the president.
And the president's on the ballot.
Almost more so than any other Republican senator has been a allegiant mouthpiece for this president, whose favorability numbers in Georgia are, well, I don't know. Eamon, can you speak to that? Because we did just have a governor run and win.
Trump's favorability in Georgia?
Yeah.
I don't think they've done one in a while, but I would think he's probably treading water at best.
Mm-hmm. We did just have a governor run in Georgia on I'm with Trump kind of ballot, mostly for the primary, but also in the general that won. And it was a little tighter than usual, but maybe that will change in 2020. I have always understood that people vote for senators in a different way than they vote for governor. Governor is about the power of the executive and being able to manage a budget and spend the taxpayer money wisely. And senator is more about kind of social issues and things that I think Stacey Abrams had a lot better footing on. So I just said the magic words there. Let's go around. Who's going to run against David Perdue in 2020, and do they have a good shot? Let's start with Hans.
I can. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Eamon.
I have two candidates. It's either the ones I'd look out for is Maria Tomlinson. I may be pronouncing her last name wrong, but she was the former mayor of Columbus, Muskogee, the consolidated government, and then obviously Stacey. I would say Stacey's probably the more credible candidate from a fundraising aspect and name ID, but Tomlinson might be, if Stacey's out, I think she'll probably be the candidate that runs against Perdue.
There's almost a looming question of it's either Stacey Abrams or it's a list of 7 other people that are waiting to see what she decides on. Mm-hmm. She has had her eyes on governor for a long time. She was really close to it. She did meet with Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader for the Senate, on Capitol Hill, presumably to talk about a potential Senate run. I think she's the obvious choice if she says that she's going to do it. But if she's not, Mayor Tomlinson and some others are going to be up there too, right?
So my question about Stacey Abrams is what's changed or what will change in the next year and a half that makes her more likely to win this Senate race than she was the governor's race. It's kind of the Beto argument. Mm-hmm. You know, all these people that are arguing or encouraging Beto O'Rourke to run for president. I hear a lot of folks that say, you know, why are you encouraging somebody who just lost their most recent race to jump into another one?
And remember, she'll be challenging an incumbent,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Who's been
a good incumbent,
who's been there for 6 years, and it's the little things that people don't realize. But when you've been in office for 6 years, you have a constituent outreach team. You have you can stockpile money from a campaign's fundraising aspect. I mean, so David Perdue is going to go in with a war chest and people, and yeah, Stacey will have that, but you know the guy has an infrastructure on the ground for 6 years of just constituent services. So alone, so I think that I think the state is changing, but I do think that that it might be a little harder for Stacey this time.
I don't really keep up with Democrat politics all that much, but I mean, I don't get the whole Stacey Abrams mania. I mean, I think she was to some extent the beneficiary of a Democrat tailwind in 2018. That race was probably closer than it should have been. In 2020, though, I think my opinion is the Democrats will have an even stronger tailwind. So, as good a campaigner as Perdue is, I think it'll be. I would not want to be a Republican on the ballot in 2020 for any office, as long as Trump's at the top.
I was going to say that's just because of the top of the ticket. Yeah.
Here's a dark horse for you. Is Kasim Reed off the table at this point?
Yes.
I mean, given everything that's going on in the city.
I don't think. Yeah, I think he's off the table.
Yeah.
I think he wasn't.
His political future. Does he have a political future?
I don't think so, unless if John Lewis were to ever leave, I think he might be heir to the throne for that seat for a local Congress race, but that's probably it.
I'm thinking the same as well. For those who don't know, Kasim Reed, the former mayor of Atlanta, has run into quite some trouble after leaving office with a lot of spending scandals and
Kickbacks, vendors, stuff. Yeah.
the kind of stuff that today's politics don't shine too brightly on. I would have said only a couple years ago that Mayor Reed was in line for that seat, or like Eamon mentioned, John Lewis's seat, which he still could be in line for. John Lewis will soon be looking for kind of the heir apparent. What you mentioned about kind of the Stacey Beto wave, I think the general consensus is, despite them having lost, is that they so overperformed where they were. Now, that doesn't exactly inspire confidence in running a race in the same state. I think the conversation around Beto is different because he's looking at a presidential run, however you feel about that. But what he's running for would change, and the demographic makeup of the area would change. So him overperforming in that area is an indicator. Stacey overperforming in Georgia and then running for Georgia again despite she lost, I think there certainly are some doubts there.
I would say there was probably two reasons why she did better than maybe some thought. One was, hey, the state's 30% African American, and first pretty much black statewide elected official running. There was kind of like the Obama factor in 2008. But the second part was the Abrams campaign focused heavy on suburban areas, and the Kemp campaign pretty much yielded the suburbs in lieu of just doing a rural campaign. I mean, we saw the movement. The rural part of Georgia actually had much higher turnout compared to 2014. But there was margins in some rural counties where Kemp was getting a better clip than Trump was.
So if you were working on her campaign, Eamon, and you were encouraging her to run or game planning for a 2020 run for Senate, what could you see her doing differently that might give her a better shot?
Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble now.
Yeah, go for it.
This is your job interview. Yeah,
I would tell her probably not to run.
You don't think she'd have a shot?
I don't think you'd be hired.
Yeah.
Bad advice.
Yeah. I think if Stacey Abrams wants to run for another seat, I think she might just have to sit out, wait for an open seat, or maybe even challenge Governor Kemp again. I don't know. But I think that just because people are looking at Trump and the state and the way things are changing, just with Purdue's style, I think it'll be tough to beat.
But as the Democratic Party of Georgia, she has to seem like the best bet. So
she's the best
that's
candidate.
got to be discouraging to hear that maybe she's the most viable candidate, but still couldn't make it work.
She is the best candidate on their bench because she has charisma with the base, and she can raise money.
And has the infrastructure in place.
And
she has kept most of that same staff through the kind of nonprofit she has started.
She had it because it's hard to track campaign disclosures for governor's races because there's so many IEs or independent expenditures and PAC money moving here, state party funds. But I had heard when it was all over, she had about a $1.5 million field program, somewhere in that range. That's a lot of doors to knock on with that budget.
And what was different about her race too is that field program centered a lot on people running down the ballot too.
Oh, so definitely did, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, in 2 years, maybe it gets a little different with the presidential calculus entering too. But it's certainly going to be tighter than it has in years past. And I think Democrats in Georgia are thinking, if we put somebody up seriously, there's more of a chance than there was maybe 5-6 years ago.
And that's a good point. I mean, they're taking a gamble. We have our best candidate is Stacey, and if she runs against Purdue and loses again, then she starts losing her credibility and becomes a perennial candidate. Or, should we keep her on the bench for 4 more years or 6 more years and she wins, but then she's just sitting on the bench for 4 to 6 years, and for her standpoint, someone better could come, and then she would be irrelevant.
Well, on the note of President Trump being on the ticket in 2020, I'll throw another dark horse candidate out there.
No.
Sally Yates.
She's always mentioned for everything and never runs.
Yeah, I think she's also waiting on the Stacey question of if Stacey decides to not run. But the problem is, once Stacey Abrams comes out and says, I'm not running, that becomes very crowded very quickly. I mean, you have former Georgia 6 candidate John Ossoff, too, also
That's right.
kind of saying, hey, Stacey's the best candidate here, but he's kind of lurking if that doesn't work out.
Does he still have money? Did he spend it all?
He was
Yeah.
campaigning in 2018. So no, he doesn't. He was not going away. I think Eamon and I, having just recently been on the trail, can probably attest to people that you see coming to your public events. And Mayor Tomlinson from Columbus was one of those coming up to these suburbs, and you're saying, Okay, why
Well,
are you here?
In Republican circles in North Fulton, we call some things the Ossoff effect.
Ah, yeah.
Still,
Mhm.
Yeah. Gosh, there was so much money in that race. But speaking of that, let's move on to Georgia 6. And that's going to be another hotly contested race here. It was so close. And like we mentioned, State Senator Brandon Beach has already declared a candidacy against Lucy McBath. Is that going to be as crowded as the Senate race?
on the Republican side, the Republican primary,
Well, his announcement just probably knocked a lot of people out of the field that might have entered otherwise.
I think so, especially in North Fulton. But remember, East Cobb makes up a good chunk of the district. But in the Republican primary, DeKalb is much smaller because there's not many Republican votes there. Cobb, probably has about the district's I think 50% Fulton, 30-something% Cobb, and the remainder DeKalb. But the Republican primary voters, it's probably like 43% Fulton and like 39% Cobb. So if there's a rich self-funder from Cobb that comes out, which there's money there, then that could change the game. But for North Fulton, Senator Beach I think is probably going to get some people out of the race just with his name ID and his record.
Yeah. AJC said today that Liz Hausman and Ben Burnett.
Ben Burnett, really?
Yeah.
I can't see either one of those running
Yeah,
against.
we had Ben
Beach.
Burnett here, but somehow
He
when
was-
we started
he's-
talking about
he's-
this topic, he seems to have
He got scared.
hidden behind the
slipped out
curtain.
back door.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
No, but
Literally.
they're both very close to Brandon Beach, so I can't imagine either one of them would.
Don't you love it when people who know nothing about the district write about something and they mention
Yeah.
names like Liz Hausman and Ben Burnett? Yeah, I'm like, yeah.
Although it's interesting. I don't know Liz very well. I know her a little bit from my days on the city council, but I actually think she would be. Not that Brandon's not a good candidate. I think he is. I think he'll be strong. I think Liz would actually be a very good candidate for the 6th district. I think suburban women are going to tell the tale in that congressional race. And I think Liz would be a strong Republican candidate for them. But I think Brandon will be a really good candidate.
We had Karen Handel. I believe she is going to run from what I've heard from sources. I know the AJC said that she's considering a run, but I think she's going to be in that race again.
Yeah, I think
what
so
do
too.
What do you guys think about her name being on the ballot for another race? It seems for like you immediately, Hans, half our life we've seen Karen Handel on the ballot for something, right?
Yeah.
I like Karen a lot as a person, but I think she may need to give it a rest for a couple of years and just see how things shake
Well,
out.
this is part of the state party calculus again, like we were talking about. Was it so close that just doing it again can maybe flip it? Or because it's not like Lucy won by 2 or 3 percentage
It's
points.
like 2,000 or 3,000 votes.
Yeah, it was so close that maybe if we just run it back and do it again
Who
and maybe
knows?
get a head start.
It's possible.
I mean, Lucy has not been able to do much of anything so far just because of the government shutdown. But is there a distinct advantage? I'll throw this to Eamon. Is there a distinct advantage to declaring a 2020 race in the Senator Beach's case this
Right now.
early, right
Mhm.
now?
There's advantages and disadvantages to announcing early. I mean, one is to scare people out, to start fundraising earlier. And sometimes, I think Senator Beach is going to be he's a pretty good fundraiser, so I think he's going to be able to do that. But a lot of times, some candidates get in early that they think they can scare people out, but they can't raise any money. If you guys can go back to 2014, Paul Brown announced 2 years before that primary, and he was trying to scare people out, but no one bought it because they knew he couldn't raise money. And by the time election night came in a 6-way race, he got 8% of the vote.
Lucy McBath should start raising money in a hurry
Oh, she did.
because Beach will
she
raise
is.
a lot.
Yeah,
Beach will
I-
raise a lot of money.
I would, yeah.
She is. And you know what makes raising money a lot easier is when you have a concrete opponent. She sent out a thread this, I think in the last day or so on Twitter, already going after Senator Beach's record. So it's really easy to start getting fundraising money when you've got kind of the boogeyman under the bed as opposed to kind of an indiscriminate, who are they going to throw at me kind of thing.
Well, and I think the tricky part for the eventual nominee in the Republican Party for the 6th is that a big part of what they're going to have to do is win back some of those people that voted for Lucy McBath as a check on Donald Trump. But in the Republican primary, it's going to be Donald Trump's base, and he's probably going to come out and campaign and to flip that back. And it's going to be difficult to sort of navigate those waters of staying down the middle in the Republican primary, and then in the general say, look, I can still be a check on Trump. So I think that's going to be the tricky part. And I think I think Lucy McBath has got a very good chance of getting reelected in the 6th.
It depends if she makes any mistakes. That'd be the question. Freshman congresswoman who ran only on one issue. I I mean, she might do good, but if she makes some unforced errors, she could be out.
Sure.
Because this district, obviously, we've seen there's a lot of elasticity in voters' minds, and if McBath causes problems, even Trump could lose a district, but a Republican that sounds like they have common sense could win. But if Karen runs against wins the primary and runs against Lucy again, what changes?
Right.
And the thing is, one thing Karen's going against, that Lucy has the I next to her name.
Mm-hmm. And the president on the
And
top
Donald
of the
Trump
ticket.
on the
Yeah.
It's an uphill battle
Yeah.
for even
Yeah.
a strong Republican.
Yeah,
it's,
I agree.
It's an uphill.
Well, and to your point earlier, Mike, that was the curious part to me about Senator Beach's announcement, is that this seat seems far more appealing in 2022 for a Republican to run than it is in 2020. So,
Well, I think what's going to happen is we're going to have a redistricting in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
It's very likely. I mean, because our district to the east, Woodall seat, I think that's going to flip. I just think it's the demographics are changing there, and
It was
Woodall-
as close almost.
430 votes
Yeah, oh
out
my
of
gosh.
300,000 cast.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Remember the good old Donald Mitchell 7-vote day? Kind of the same equivalency with 300 and something thousand votes
And
cast.
Carolyn Bordeaux's looking at running that back again and giving it another shot.
And Woodall was charged by Republicans by not running quote a spirited campaign. I mean, I didn't know what the strategy was, but he started very late, and it was very close. But I do think that district will probably flip in 2020, and so from there, we're not going to get a new seat. So I think from there they'll probably just cede the 7th and make it more Democratic, and then give like the Forsyth County part of Woodall's district to the 6th, and then from there it becomes a safe Republican district. So in let's say that no Republican wins in 2020, but it's a safe district in 2022. Then whoever wins that Republican primary has that seat indefinitely.
That's some high
In
level
20
movements
whoever-
right there.
Yeah.
you're saying whoever wins the primary in 2020 would be the obvious candidate
Well, it's
for a safe seat in 2022.
yeah, and
Okay.
if the Republican were to lose in 2020 and we'd have to do this again in the 6th in 2022, the Republicans would be running in a safe district where McBath would probably either not run, or if she did be in the ballot, she'd lose by 20 or 15 points. So
Okay.
we'll just see what happens. But I can tell you the 6th district will probably get some favorable redistricting for Republicans.
Let's move off the campaign trail, please.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll get back here in probably 7 days. but-
It never ends.
Yeah, really. And just, gosh, declaring 15 days after being sworn in, it's just, and before we move on, I should note, the Republican Party is not the only one that's getting ready for District 6. The DCCC, the Congressional Campaign Committee, has already spent money in District 6 and District 7.
District 6 is a tier 1 race, but
Right.
in the party's ranking
So,
system.
so
Yeah.
digital ad buys are already happening. So the Christmas grace period of not seeing political ads is over. You will see them on your feed.
You say it's early, but when would you announce?
When
When would you announce?
well, I only won my race by 161 votes, so maybe I'm not the
I
best
think a
person
lot
to
of it was
ask.
a blocking.
And-
It was a blocking maneuver, and you know,
Yeah,
And about campaigns, Mike, it seems since the 2016 presidential election campaign, has there not been any special or anything going on? I mean, I think we've had very little downtime in campaigns since then.
it's perpetual.
the eyes have been
and-
drawn, whether it's Senate race in Alabama or here in Georgia 6. Right after
because
the election,
after 2016, we had the 2017 specials, and then from there we had the municipals of 2017, the primaries of 2018, which are obviously a little bigger in Alpharetta with everything going on, then the general election. But there has not been much break in politics.
Yeah. So what you're saying is we need a break. So let's get into the
Definitely.
wonky policy stuff here for a second. The Democratic leadership put forth Medicaid expansion this past week. We knew this was coming. We knew this was going to happen. It came with a fiscal note that put I say hard numbers. They're not really hard numbers, but they're projections on how much Medicaid expansion would cost. I'll run through it really quick. $150 million in 2020 and range between $188 million and $213 million by 2022. Medicaid expansion covers this gap of people that isn't in the low enough income gap to receive Medicaid, but isn't high enough to either get covered by their employer or afford insurance out of pocket. For comparison on those numbers, the teacher pay raises is around $600 million, so that's almost double. And the total state budget is around $27 billion. So this is around kind of a less than 1% issue, but this is a huge issue for the Democrats going forward. The conversation about Medicaid waivers has started to change. It's become a little more favorable in my eyes, but I would love to get your thoughts on how you guys see Medicaid going forward and kind of fixing healthcare altogether. Keep in mind, Tom Price is still working with the governor.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
I think it was a mistake. Speaking as a Republican, I think it was a mistake for Georgia not to take the expansion, especially if the federal government was going to, fund it for the first few
I'm curious
years.
why
And-
you're speaking in the past tense.
Well, because I'm speaking about the decision that was made several years ago
Sure.
not to
When it
do it.
first
But
came
we
about.
are where we are today. I mean, the Medicaid system. Gosh, if we had another half hour, and I'm no expert on it, but insurance premiums are ridiculous. A lot of that has to do with the mandated coverages and so forth and so on. The whole thing's a mess. I think they should consider the numbers you cited are really not big numbers in the grand scheme of the state
And
budget.
I did leave one out. It would cover between 400,000, 500,000 uninsured Georgians here. That number varies wildly depending on who you ask. But in this fiscal note, they had it just above 500,000.
And this issue is actually popular with Republicans. I think the majority of state Republicans actually support Medicaid expansion because I think people realize what a mess the health insurance system is. And you could talk another half hour about fixing the Medicaid system, overall. But in terms of expanding the coverage, it seems to be a pretty popular issue even among Republicans.
Eamon, does having hard numbers on this change any of the calculus for state Republicans on how they vote?
Maybe a little bit. A good answer to that would be, I think the AJC, Mike, did poll. I think 51% of Republicans were in favor of some limited expansion, at least. So that tells you something. The question is, anytime we see a government program increase, a lot of the times, in 2 or 3 years, it increases a lot more than projections. So I think a lot of people are going to be wary of that. But I think Governor Kemp said a few favorable things about it, if I can recall, right?
Yeah, and Governor Deal, before he left office, was saying
He
that
had a pretty hardline stance against it.
And he said that in principle, it could work, but that you're relying on the federal government to keep the money coming. And I think a lot of the conversation around it just has to do with this uncertainty of like, okay, so when Medicaid expansion came about, like you were saying, Mike, it was a good idea then, but now we have so much uncertainty on the federal level of whether or not they're going to pull dollars out.
Or whether they're going to be open from one day to the next.
Right,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
But still, even after 2020, I think the federal government still covers 90%.
It does.
I mean, you're still leveraging your money 9 to 1. So they're not paying 100%, but they're paying 90% of it. That's I don't get the math on that, but
We just had some very recently very red states have ballot referenda on expanding it in their state. So the longer that Georgia decides to not expand Medicaid, the more we're out on a limb as the one big red state, big purple state that chooses not to, chooses not to take those dollars.
well, you're a business owner. You know what it takes to cover health insurance premium. I've been in the private market, recently for health insurance, and it's crazy.
For me,
It's crazy.
my rates, before the Obamacare, when all this started, it was like $184 a month with a $2,000 deductible. Now I'm at $396 a month with a $7,500 deductible, and I'm in,
That's cheap.
I was going to say that too.
Wow, where do I get that
times
deal?
hit, yeah.
That's cheap. But they really, not to interrupt, I'm sorry about that, but they should devise some sort of policies. Most people do not have $1 million claims. They should have policies for everyday people with everyday issues. Your kid breaks a leg, or you go to the hospital for a day or two for some sort of your bills, $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000. For a lot of people, that's a budget buster.
Well, but part of the issue is that the oldest 5% of our population accounts for almost half of all healthcare costs in the country. So you can't have limited policies for young, healthy people because they basically need to overpay to cover the higher aged end of the population.
You could do a private policy that may have a max payout of $25,000 or $50,000, where the premiums would be reasonable. All right, and then maybe Medicaid is your reinsurer after that for the really big claims. But most people who are on tight budgets, they could have a smaller policy to deal with the everyday kind of stuff. Anyway, I know we're drifting off topic there,
No,
but,
that's-
but it takes, I think, just to blanket say, no, we're not going to accept
Mhm.
Medicaid expansion. I just don't think that's a political solution, not a
Mhm.
financial.
Well, and
solution.
being down in the Capitol, if I had to kind of look into the future a little bit, I think Medicaid waivers are getting more acceptable because they're getting closer to what Medicaid expansion would actually look like.
Mhm.
I think at a certain point, lawmakers will say, "Okay, we don't care what you call it. If you want to call it a Medicaid waiver and it provides the same benefits and it's going to cover this many people, let's do it then." I don't see, Medicaid waivers are starting to be developed, and there's a line item in the budget to pay $1 million to a group of people to develop what a good waiver program would look like. We mentioned former HHS Secretary Tom Price is there. He loves to talk about these ideas. I'm sure he will be heard from really soon. But I'm not sold that it actually is going to get any further than it did in campaign season, even though we've got these numbers on it now.
Well, they need a solution to it.
Mhm.
It's a difficult problem for a lot of people.
And I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. We just got a new governor sworn in, new legislature sworn in. They're figuring ways how they're going to work with each other. The lines of communication are going to be much different than Governor Deal's administration. Not saying in a bad way, but they have to. He was there for 8 years. They knew how things worked. Things are different there now. So I think things are moving a little slowly down there. It's going to pick up. I think what we're getting into day 5 of 40 next Monday, but this one year will be very interesting. I mean, I don't expect a whole lot to happen this year, but we're going to see how these people are going to work together.
To a certain extent, Preston, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, being down at the Capitol so much. Is there a narrow, limited window to get that done? And the reason I ask, I'll give you an example. With 2020 elections around the corner, could there be an argument to be made for the Republican state legislature to take this issue off the table?
I think it's actually closer to what Eamon was just saying. It's almost the opposite. When you have a new set of legislators and more new legislators on both sides than we've seen in a while, a new lieutenant governor, the same Speaker of the House, but a new complete administration, it's going to take some time for everybody to get their feet on the ground. And it's possible this is not even the most talked about healthcare issue in the Capitol, because we still have certificate of need coming up all the time.
Yeah.
So, it's almost like if we're going to go through and check the boxes, we're going to do something on, gun control or gun safety. We're going to do something on education, which we've already talked about, the teacher pay raises, and we're going to do something on healthcare. This may not even be the healthcare thing. I know Minority Leader Bob Trammell hopes it is. And of course, they're trying to ride that wave of the 2018 campaign, but that can only take them so far.
All right.
Why are they so limited on the number of issues they can tackle in a year?
That's
I mean, really, can they not walk and chew
we
gum at the
we
same
can solve
time?
democracy now if you want, but it's
you
going to be a
got
long
chairman
show.
of this committee and the chairman of that committee. I mean, do they,
Yeah, I
can
mean,
they not tackle more than 2 big issues
Is
in
that
a
a
year?
rhetorical question, Mike?
Well, not really.
well, I don't want to get into.
It's a process down there.
Yeah, I don't want to get into how much of a slog it actually is, but I mean, bills have to be drafted and they have to be read 3 times, and then they go to committee, and then they've got to be debated, and you've got to bring in experts, and then they go to a different committee, and then you schedule them on the floor for a vote.
What have they been doing since last year?
The
when they
vast
met?
majority of reasons why bills that most people are in favor of don't pass is because they ran out of time. So like last year, if you look at the end of the 2018 session, you see all of these bills that got tabled a day before the session was over because they just didn't get to it.
They ran out of time, or they weren't brought up.
They ran out of time. They ran out of
Yeah.
time. I mean, we are in session from
I'm with you, Mike.
10 to noon every day. I'm not
10
telling.
to, wait a minute, from 10 to noon?
Mhm.
Really?
And let me.
No
let
wonder
me,
they ran out of
Let
time.
me throw this out there. The first 20 minutes of that is Doctor of the Day and Chaplain of the Day. So you're
Wow.
you're listening to speakers. So you take votes very quickly,
Yeah.
and it seems like you're getting a lot done, but a lot of it is resolutions and a lot of it is minor bills. I mean, the reality is that if something gets to the Rules Committee and the majority party doesn't want it to get passed, it's not getting out of there.
So it's not a
gonna
matter
stay
of
there
time.
forever.
So what you just said
And
is it's not a matter of time.
well, for some issues it is, and
Okay.
for some it's not. And for some, the perception would be preferred as a matter of time.
Right.
So they will let it out of committee with one session.
10 to
go.
noon, huh?
10 to noon.
Whatever
Well-
we're paying them, it's not enough.
When
It's a great hourly rate.
I know,
When the Senate bills cross over to the House and vice versa, those sessions get a lot longer. But
Yeah.
especially in these first 2 weeks,
Nothing's
it's
happening.
it's almost like everybody's
It's a
still
ghost town
taking a
there.
deep breath. Yeah, yeah. The incoming legislators just got office assignments 2 days ago. So
Hey, here's an idea. What about a special session?
we just
They
had
have
one of those.
10
yeah.
more. They have 10 other months in the year, you know?
Yeah, I am actually pretty grateful that the special session we just had was used on hurricane funding, and that's it. There was some talk for a second there after watching other states have sessions that stripped incoming administrations or whatever of their power and changed some rules. And I know we're in a different situation because the majority party stayed the majority, but yeah, I'm glad that special session kind of stayed limited and focus and things like that. But that's a great transition into a question we did get on Twitter, and I want to address it really quickly because I should have hit it in episode 1. But Gary Thompson, if that name sounds familiar, it's because we share a last name and we shared a home for a long time. He asked us this question on Twitter just to outline what the majorities are right now in the houses. So how many votes you would need to get a bill through on the Democratic side, how many flips, that kind of thing. So currently we have 105 Republicans, 75 Democrats in the House. That's 16 flips the Democrats would need to get something passed, or 16 flips Democrats would need to have a majority in 2020. That's a target for them. As someone who's run in this area a little bit, 16 more seats seems really hard to come by. What do you think, Eamon?
That the Democrats need to pick up in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say just from my side. It's going to be very hard to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some seats that we did not expect to lose, and there's some that have been a little closer. But picking up 16 seats, I mean, I think there's probably about going into 2020. There's probably about 2 or 3 Democratic seats that could be picked up by Republicans, and there's probably about say 6, 7, 8 seats that Democrats could pick up. So if you net it all out, maybe the Democrats pick up another 5, 6, 7 more seats.
Mm-hmm.
But then we got redistricting in 2021.
And everybody's flying on high alert now. You can't catch an incumbent lawmaker sleeping.
A lot of people were caught off guard.
Yeah.
And I remember my side, people were telling legislator X, "Oh, you got this. Don't worry about it. You're good. You're good." And then on election night, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to make that happen 2 elections in a row.
A lot of panicked phone calls at 10 o'clock that night.
Yeah.
In the Senate, it gets even worse for the Democratic side. You have 35 Republicans, 21 Democrats, 14 Senate seats. I don't know how you find that as Democrats. You maybe find 1.
There's only about 2 or 3 in play.
Right.
That won't flip. If things start flipping in the next couple cycles, the Senate's going to stay Republican probably for another decade at least, just by the way lines are drawn.
It's really the past couple of years it's been remarkable just to hold off a supermajority in the Senate for Democrats. Yeah, so that it was close.
At one time, we actually had one more than a supermajority. I think that lady out in Conyers happened to win a special. It was kind of funny having 39 senators there.
Mm-hmm. So to close this out, I want to go around the table and talk about what we're watching for this week. It can be national level, local level, what you're looking forward to seeing. I know we just had the shutdown deal go through. I'm about to go read about that and see if it's actually going to happen. So let's go around. We'll start with Mike.
You know, that kind of catches me off guard. I don't know what to watch for this week. Every day is interesting. I think you just have to stay close to your Twitter feed just to. I think the national stuff's really, really interesting. I think I've never really followed Nancy Pelosi that much, but I think Trump may want to pay more attention to her going forward.
Mm-hmm. Nancy, as he's fond of calling her, is the nickname now. Nancy.
She doesn't have a moniker.
Not one of his better nicknames.
You got Crying Chuck, you got Little Marco, but Nancy's just Nancy.
I'm sure something.
She should be honored.
I think that's where all the action is.
Yeah. Eamon, what about you?
I would say 2 things: all national, the shutdown, and also we've had more people coming out declaring their intentions to run for the Democratic nomination. What was Kamala Harris this week? Now we're going to see who is going to fall next in the dominoes, who's going to trigger next. So I wouldn't be surprised if another candidate came out this week or the next 2 weeks. But obviously the shutdown, I'm very interested in.
Hans Appen?
Well, we mentioned it a little bit earlier. I mean, you have to expect that Stacey Abrams is going to make her decision here fairly soon.
I think it was a March, right? March decisions, he said?
March?
Preston
doesn't think it's going to be March.
It needs to be sooner than that.
Yeah.
If she said March, then that's one thing, but
Sure.
it needs to be sooner.
Because time's ticking away.
Yeah. And, and then again, we talked about it. If she comes out and says that she's not running, the domino effect and the field that opens up after that will be interesting. So I guess that's what I'm watching for is if Stacey Abrams decides to make that leap or if we're going to see an open field.
Mm-hmm. What I'm watching is, I know we have another episode before the Super Bowl, but preparations have already started. They've put the trophy up on the Mercedes-Benz, which I walk by every day to work. It is going to be a bit of a nightmare. I am really curious to see how Mayor Bottoms and MARTA and all of these different pieces that have to come together handle it. But I hope it's going to be great. I really hate that the Patriots are coming to my town, but there's only so much you can do.
Did you see all that about all the Saints fans who were mad at Mayor Bottoms for cheering for the Rams there? And
Ooh.
I drive by those billboards every day to work, the billboards that say NFL blew it and all that. It's yeah.
when they were saying too how much the Saints fans would have showed up
I know.
Oh yeah.
in Atlanta for that.
I can at least
Good
be
luck
grateful
getting a lot
for
of
that.
Rams fans down.
Good
to
for
Atlanta.
Sean McVay though. What a great story for
Yeah.
a local guy out of Marist.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
He's 33 years old and setting the world on fire.
He's got a big contract in his future.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Those
come back-
Marist guys, they
to
do
come
okay.
back
They
to
land on
Marist,
their
right?
feet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marist is going to go grab him and have him come back, right?
Yeah.
That's what you mean? Okay, good. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week. We have a official Twitter account now. It's the GA Politics Pod. Give us a follow on there. Send us your questions. You can get featured on the show. Be sure to listen to some other shows. I told Hans this morning that the daily update that the Appen Network does half of my job for me, and I don't have to compile local events. They do a great job of that. So go give them a listen, and thanks for checking us out. Be sure to subscribe, and we'll see everybody next week.